Okay, welcome back. This is the Virtual Residency Workshop 2021, Introductory, Intermediate, and Advanced. It's Tuesday, June 8th. This is the mid-afternoon session, how to do an intake interview and intake interview practicum, led by Dirk Colbry of Michigan State University. So I'm going to turn it over to Dirk. Dirk, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I am, in theory, sharing my screen because I have a few slides. Today, we're going to talk about, in practice, doing intake interviews. And so I like to also call this first contact. I like to think of researchers, specifically faculty, as aliens, and that we have to get to know their culture and way of talking. So that's what we're going to do today. I just want you to know about myself. I am the PI on the NSF-funded Cyber Ambassador Training Grant, and we develop these types of training programs for communication, teamwork, and leadership, and we're training CI professionals, cyber infrastructure professionals, those skills, and they're called professional skills training programs. We've developed the curriculum. We're going to offer the curriculum this summer if you're interested in trying it out. If you kind of like this type of format, we're going to be doing it in July. Where we'll have one day, a 3-hour session on communication, then another day, a 3-hour session on teamwork, and another day, a 3-hour section on leadership. And then we're going to do the whole thing again in August. And if you attend all three, you get to be officially certified as a cyber ambassador. And everybody who gets full certification will be invited to do an in-person workshop where we're going to train facilitators who then can go out and be officially trained to do the communication, teamwork, and leadership curriculum. So that's what we do. We actually have a bunch of the Cyber Ambassador facilitators here helping out today. And so maybe you'll get to meet some of us, and see how that goes. But in today's agenda, what we're going to do is talk about intake interviews. I'll introduce what that is and how to do a good one. And then we'll practice some intake interviews, because in all communication, lecturing is not how you teach someone how to communicate. You practice how you do it. And so what we have is a bunch of volunteers that are in this meeting with us, researchers from the real world. And we're going to have them in breakout rooms, and then they'll actually rotate between the breakout rooms. Everybody else will stay in the same breakout room. And then you're going to conduct as a group, a research interview or an intake interview with those researchers. Learn about their research, learn about how technology might be able to help them, and basically practice. And so that's what we're going to do. And then that's going to be about 15 minutes. And then we're going to rotate the researchers between the rooms, and you get another chance to practice. The idea is practice as much as you can in this safe environment where, emotions and funding and other things are not at risk. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to wrap up. So that's what we're doing today. Right now, I'd like, if you are volunteering, if you have already talked to either Henry or me and have agreed prior to this to volunteer as a researcher, please make sure that you have an underscore at the beginning of your name. That's how we're going to use to rotate you between rooms. And yeah, I think that's all the logistics we need. So an intake interview is just that. It's when you're being introduced to a researcher and learning about them and finding out how to fix their problems. And so a typical one might start out something like, "Hi, my name is Lauren. I'd like to use the HPC for my academic work. How do I get started?" What questions do you ask? How do you get to know these people, right? So I'm just going to ask in chat. I don't have anything that goes on this slide. I just am asking an open-ended question. Why are intake interviews important? So give me your answers in the chat window. To give you some idea about what's going on, that's right. They need to know if they'll be taxing our resources. Ooh, wow, good ones. First impressions. Yeah, that's a big one, right? You want to make a good first impression, what the scope of a project is. Gauge improvements for later on. These are all great things. Read the chat. I can't read them that fast. That's awesome. So yeah, intake interviews are important. I think it sets that first impression. It gets you to know people. And what are our goals for this type of thing? Well, I see two major goals. One is to identify problems and start to come up with a plan to solve those problems, right? Researchers are coming to us because they have a problem. Maybe their computer's too slow at home. Maybe they don't have a piece of software they need. Maybe they want to do a new type of research that they don't even know how to get started on. They have a problem, and we are here to try to help them find a solution. But the other thing I want you to think about when you talk about intake interviews is that you're also trying to build a relationship. You want the researcher to know you, to know what kind of things you can provide, but you also want to get to know the researcher so that you can build a relationship, ideally based on trust, and then that will move forward as you're helping the researcher out. So those are our two goals, and I want to keep them both in mind when you're doing your intake interviews. So a good intake interview, I usually start off with, tell me about your research, right? You want to get to know the researchers, and they care most about their research. They don't actually often care about the computing. The computing is a tool, a means to the end to get them to the research. So ask them, what are you trying to do? You're trying to, cure world hunger. You're trying to, fix global warming, whatever it is. Typically in an intake interview, I would say, don't rush too much. Let the researcher talk. You're trying to, again, build that relationship. Now, today, we want to go a little faster because we only have about 15 minutes with our researchers. So we don't want to ramble on too much today, but generally we want to use the time to get to know people. Your goal is to find those fundamental problems that are trying to be solved, and then trying to reformulate the problem in terms of computing, right? So if they're trying to solve world hunger, that's great, but what is it that the computer will get them to their goal? How are we going to use technology to get them where they need to go? Ask them a really important question to ask early on is, how do they want the problem to be solved? How do they think the computer will solve their problem, right? We often make a lot of assumptions, and by asking them what their expectations are, how they think they're going to use the system or whatever to solve their problem, that will give you some clear insight about any assumptions they're making, and also help you guide them in the right direction. You also want to use the intake interview to assess the researcher's ability, right? Some researchers, they're all intelligent. You can assume that they're experts in their field, but they will have varying levels of ability on the compute system. So, some of them might be expert programmers. I've worked with a lot of people who are better programmers than me. But then some of them might just be introduced. And so one of our goals also should be assessing their ability so that we can best fix their problems. All right. So one of Henry's adages that I really like is, explain it to me like I'm 12, right? A 12-year-old has an extensive enough understanding of the world and vocabularies that you can have an intelligent conversation with them, but they don't necessarily know how everything works. And if we try to explain it to me like I'm 12, that gives us a level of detail to help us avoid jargon and things like that. And I think it should go both ways. We are the computer experts or the technology experts. And so we need to explain it to them, not talking down to them, but to explain it using words that are not, that are more common, that aren't jargon and that kind of thing. And so that's a really good goal. But also, if you're trying to understand the researchers, sometimes they say a bunch of jargon themselves, and you can say, hey, hold on, can you just explain it to me like I'm 12? And that will help them reframe how they're talking and allow them to hopefully communicate to you what they're trying to do. So I'm going to give you a few tools to try out just for fun during these interviews today. So one of the tools we call check for understanding. Since your goal is to explain computing to the researcher, you want to make sure that they understand what you're doing. So after you've explained something, you can say something like, phew, I just threw out a lot of information. Would you mind sharing what you think is going on so I can see if my explanation makes sense, right? I just explained all of our HPC systems. Which one do you think will work for you? You want to give them these open-ended questions to help you understand if they understood what you said, right? If you're checking for understanding, you don't want to just say, do you understand? Because they're going to say probably yes or no. And that's not really helpful. Really, you want to give them an open-ended question so that they can say, explain to you what they understood, and then it gives you a better context and a better understanding on where you need to fill in the gaps. And so this is a tool you can use as a speaker trying to explain a complex concept. But the reverse works as well. So if the researcher is trying to explain something complex, the tool you want to use in that situation where you're trying to understand what the researcher is saying is paraphrasing. You basically say back to them what you understood. So using your own words. So you say, you're trying to solve food shortages around the world, and you're using imaging on seeds that you have 10,000 of them and you want to process them on the HPC. You know, you're just using your own words. You can stumble, that's fine. But when you use your own words back to them, the researchers hear what you understood and they can use that to fill in your blanks. And so you're trying to get to a common set of understanding. So just an important note, paraphrasing is not parroting. You don't want to just use the same words back to them. You want to restructure it based on your understanding of what they said so that you can build models of each other's understanding and work with those models. That's the goal. A third tool that I really like is asking for clarifying questions. These sometimes can be related directly to the problem, but might be a little bit indirect. And the goal here is to help you understand what might be needed to solve the problem. And some of the ones that I really like is like, what programming language does your software use? The answer to that can really shift what kind of solution you're going to give. If they say, I don't know, it's a piece of software I downloaded off the internet, that tells you something, versus it's written in C++ and I've been developing it myself for the last 10 years, versus it's a piece of R code that I got from a colleague down the hall, right? Each of those answers to that question tells you something different about how you might solve that problem. And so asking good clarifying questions can just help you get into the mindset of what might be a good solution, where to gauge the level of interaction. Another thing I really want you to remember, now we might not be getting this in today because today is not about saying yes, but you don't want to say no if you don't have to, right? We are here to solve problems, not to just say, no, go figure it out yourself. And I really like Henry's way of saying this. You don't say no because we don't have enough compute power. You say, yes, if we can obtain some funding for more compute power, right? If you just flip it around and say, yes, if, it becomes a more positive statement than a negative statement. And heck, it might get you some additional resources or something. So that's another thing you can try. Now, I know I did these fast, but the last thing I want you to do in your intake interviews is you always close them out with follow-up actions and follow-up times. And so after you've brought the person in, you say, hey, we've established we want to do A, B, and C. I'm going to do A, you're going to do B and C. Let's follow up in a week. Always do this and always come up with a time to follow up and then follow up at that time. If a researcher says, I'm going to do some research and get back to you, that's great. You say, you check on them in a couple of weeks. You literally put a time in your calendar and say, follow up with the research in a couple of weeks and see if they figured something out. You don't want to pester them, but you want to show that you're invested in helping them solve their problems. And so by doing that, you become a person that solves problems instead of a person that creates problems. So I did that awfully fast because I wanted to talk about the practice activity. How are we doing time-wise?
We are doing great. You took the exact right amount of time. We'll run a few minutes over because we started a few minutes late, but that's okay because this is followed by a 90-minute lunch break. So
perfect. So you will be assigned to breakout rooms. I want you to stay in those rooms, and then we're going to rotate the researcher out. We'll send little messages saying the researchers will rotate out, and then we're going to put them in different rooms. And so you will stay with the same group of people. You'll be in the room about 15 minutes. As a group, conduct an intake interview. Someone step up and say, ask the first question, tell me about your research, those types of things. And so as a group, talk about the process as well. Put your questions in the chat if you want. And yeah, just see what you can learn. And these are volunteers, so be nice. And thank you to all the volunteers for volunteering to be in the backgrounds. Some of the volunteers are actual researchers and some of the volunteers are cyber ambassadors. So the cyber ambassadors will pretend to be a researcher and also talk you through these things and help you out if you have any questions. So I think that's what we're going to do. I will make sure this, Henry said the slides will be coming out shortly. Is there anything else we need to do before breaking up?
I think that's it. So I'm going to stop the recording. We're not going to record the breakout room.